The humid air of Rio de Janeiro hung thick over the Maracanã as the clock pushed past 2 a.m. The crowd hadn't moved for hours, a sea of nearly 350,000 souls, waiting, chanting, trembling. When the house lights finally dimmed, a roar unlike anything the band had ever heard erupted across the stadium. It wasn't just noise. It was a wave, alive, breathing, shaking the ground beneath their feet. From backstage, Freddie Mercury took one last look at his reflection in the small mirror beside the curtain. His white trousers shimmered under the faint yellow light. A small crown pin rested on his chest. For a brief second, his eyes softened. This wasn't London or Tokyo or Munich. This was Brazil, a country that sang Queen's lyrics in broken English, but with hearts that understood every word. "All right, my darlings," he whispered to himself. "Let's make them feel alive." As Brian struck the first chord and Roger's drums thundered like summer rain, the lights exploded over the crowd. What Freddie saw made him step back for a moment. Hundreds of thousands of people holding lighters high, flames flickering like stars on earth. He felt something crawl up his spine. Not fear, not nerves, but awe. For all his years on stage, this was something different. "Good evening, Rio," he shouted, and the response came like a storm. "Freddie! Freddie! Freddie!" That chant, rising from the depths of the tropical night, echoed through the mountains and back into the heart of the stadium. The band could barely hear their own instruments. And yet, in that chaos, there was harmony. It was as if the entire city had joined the concert. The air, the lights, the heat, the pulse. Freddie lifted his microphone stand, smiled and thought, if the world ends tonight, it will end dancing. The night had already reached a fever pitch when the opening piano melody of It's a Hard Life began. Freddie sat down by the grand piano, adjusting the microphone as the crowd's chants slowly dissolved into silence. A faint breeze brushed across the stage, the kind that carries stories. He took a deep breath, and for a moment, all that existed was the light, the sound, and the pulse of hundreds of thousands waiting for that first note. His voice, tender yet powerful, filled the humid air. "I don't want my freedom." The audience erupted cheering as if the first words were a prayer. Freddie smiled faintly and continued, pouring emotion into every syllable. Behind him, Brian's guitar whispered like a hymn, while Roger kept a steady rhythm, the heartbeat of the song. Cameras flashed across the ocean of faces, each one capturing a fragment of musical history in motion. But then, as the song moved toward its second verse, something shifted. Freddie leaned forward, his eyes searching the air, his lips parting, and suddenly, the words were gone, just for a heartbeat, but long enough for him to know. The melody carried on, the band unaware for a second, and Freddie froze. He blinked, mouth still open, as if trying to catch the runaway line that had slipped from memory into the night. For someone like Freddie Mercury, precise, expressive, deeply professional, that kind of lapse was almost unthinkable. Yet in front of a crowd larger than any he'd ever faced, it had happened. The irony was sharp. Singing a song about life's struggles, he was now living one. A single second of silence stretched endlessly under the spotlights, and in that silence, the world seemed to hold its breath. The camera caught it perfectly. That fleeting moment when Freddie's eyes widened and his voice stopped mid-line. For a split second, confusion flashed across his face, quickly masked by a nervous smile. He looked out at the ocean of people before him, all singing along, oblivious to what had just happened. The band played on, unaware that their frontman, the man who could command an audience of thousands with a single glance, had just gone completely blank. Freddie's fingers froze above the piano keys. He tried to force the words back into his mind, but all he heard was the echo of his own heartbeat. For someone who lived for precision on stage, that moment felt like standing on a tightrope with no net beneath him. He let out a soft, almost imperceptible laugh, half disbelief, half surrender, and then simply looked up at the sky as if asking the stars for help. The silence between lines became electric. Thousands of people started to notice something wasn't right. The lyrics didn't come, yet Freddie's presence filled the void. His body swayed, his hands gestured dramatically, and somehow, without a single word, he kept the audience's attention. It was as though he had turned vulnerability into art. And then, in one of those rare, spontaneous moments that define live music, the crowd began to sing for him. Voices rose from the front rows, hesitant at first, then stronger. "This is a hard life." The melody returned, carried not by the man who wrote it, but by the people who adored him. Freddie froze again, but this time it wasn't fear. It was awe. He blinked, pressed a single chord and smiled. The night had taken control. For a moment Freddie simply sat there, stunned, smiling faintly, as if he were witnessing something sacred. The crowd had not only noticed his mistake, they had transformed it. 300,000 voices rose together, filling the humid Rio night, echoing through the stadium like a choir born out of pure love. Every syllable they sang carried a piece of devotion, every note a promise. "We're with you, Freddie." Brian May glanced over, half in disbelief, half in admiration. Roger's sticks hovered mid-air, and John Deacon gave a small grin, shaking his head as if to say, "Only here, only in Brazil." Freddie leaned back from the piano, microphone in hand, and began to conduct the audience like an orchestra. He waved, pointed, encouraged, his arms wide open as if embracing the entire stadium. What had started as a forgotten lyric had now become one of the most breathtaking sing-alongs in rock history. The lights swayed over the sea of faces, glimmering off the sweat and tears of people who had waited their whole lives to see him. Freddie, overcome with emotion, lifted the mic and shouted, "Beautiful! You're beautiful!" The roar that followed was deafening. It wasn't just applause. It was communion. The crowd didn't just save the song. They became the song. From that point on, it no longer mattered that he had forgotten the words. The music was no longer about perfection. It was about connection. Freddie stood up, spun once dramatically, and sang the chorus again, this time with his entire soul, his voice cracking with emotion. The band followed him, that energy renewed by the love pouring from the audience. The stadium had turned into one beating heart, and Freddie Mercury was at its center. Freddie Mercury had always known how to command a stage, but that night it was the audience commanding him. As the voices continued to echo through the air, he laughed, a genuine, unguarded laugh that burst through the microphone and melted into the song itself. It was the kind of laughter that only comes when pressure turns into pure joy. He raised his hand toward the crowd, his fingers trembling slightly, and for a moment he looked less like a rock star and more like a man overwhelmed by love. The camera zoomed in on his face. His eyes were wet, his smile real, almost childlike. "You sing better than I do," he joked, his voice breaking with amusement. The audience roared back, chanting his name again, "Freddie! Freddie! Freddie!" He tapped the piano with one hand, teasing a few playful notes, then pointed at Brian and shouted, "Let's show them how it's done." The band erupted back into the melody, stronger than ever, feeding off the energy that rolled over them like a living wave. Freddie began to improvise, blending laughter and melody, turning the forgotten words into playful la-la-las, twirling around the microphone stand as if the mistake had been part of the plan all along. His charisma, his humor, his courage to laugh at himself, that was the essence of his genius. In that moment, the entire world remembered why Freddie Mercury was more than a singer. He was a storyteller of emotion, capable of transforming imperfection into art. By the time the chorus returned, he was back in full command, elegant, flamboyant, radiant. The crowd followed his every gesture, singing louder, dancing, crying. When he hit the final high note, his smile widened, his eyes closed, and he simply whispered, "Obrigado, Rio." And for a heartbeat, every person in that crowd felt as if he was speaking only to them. The moment Freddie's laughter echoed across the stadium, something ignited among the other three members of Queen. Brian May turned toward him, eyes wide with joy, fingers gliding across the guitar strings like fire on silk. The sound that emerged was no longer just accompaniment. It was a conversation, a dialogue of emotion between friends who had shared a lifetime on the road. Roger Taylor's drumming became thunderous, rolling through the humid Rio air like the heartbeat of the night, while John Deacon's steady bass anchored them all, unshakable amid the chaos. For years, the band had been through everything together. The highs of success, the exhaustion of fame, and the quiet moments of tension no one ever saw. But in that instant, under the tropical sky of Brazil, they were united again, not as celebrities, not as legends, but as four musicians feeling the same pulse. Freddie turned to them mid-song, raised his arm and shouted, "Come on, boys!" The audience exploded again. It was as if the entire planet had tilted toward that one stage. Brian stepped closer to Freddie during the solo, their smiles meeting in a silent exchange. It was more than professionalism. It was friendship rekindled. Roger's rhythm grew wilder, feeding off the energy pouring from the crowd. The stadium trembled under the sound, a mix of joy, sweat, and freedom. The mistake that could have ruined the performance had instead become the spark that reignited their chemistry. As the song drew toward its end, Freddie leaned into the microphone and, with a mischievous glint, sang the forgotten verse correctly this time. The crowd erupted once more, celebrating not the perfection of the line, but the triumph of the moment. When the final chord rang out, Freddie raised both arms high, triumphant, and the band members exchanged glances that said everything. "We're back, and we're alive." Backstage, the air felt thick with humidity and adrenaline. Freddie walked off first, a towel draped around his neck, his chest still heaving from the final chorus. The sound of the crowd chanting his name followed him through the tunnel like an echo from another world. "That was bloody insane," Roger gasped, dropping into a chair, sweat dripping from his hair. Brian laughed, still clutching his guitar. "You forgot the words and somehow made it sound intentional. Only you could pull that off." Freddie smirked, wiping his face. "Darling, I didn't forget. I simply decided to let the audience participate." They all burst into laughter. But beneath the humor, there was something deeper in Freddie's eyes, a quiet gratitude, the kind that lingers after a miracle. He sat down, looking at his hands for a long moment. "Did you hear them?" he finally said softly. "Every single one of them. They sang for me." The room fell silent for a moment. Roger nodded, his usual sarcasm replaced by awe. "You gave them your heart, Fred, and they gave it back tonight." Freddie looked up, that signature grin spreading slowly across his face again. "Maybe that's what music really is," he murmured. "A conversation between souls, even when one of them forgets the words." Later, as the band toasted with champagne, the noise from the stadium still rumbling outside, Freddie stood by the small dressing-room window, watching the distant lights of Rio flicker like stars over the ocean. He whispered to himself almost inaudibly, they didn't come for perfection. They came for truth, and for the first time that night, he let himself feel the full weight of what had happened, a mistake that had turned into a masterpiece. In the years that followed, fans would replay that moment over and over, the night Freddie forgot the words in Rio. Grainy VHS tapes circulated through homes, capturing not a flaw, but a fragment of humanity. Each time someone watched it, they didn't see a mistake. They saw a man connecting with his audience in the purest way possible. That forgotten line became immortal, proof that even the greatest performers are, at their core, human beings moved by emotion, vulnerability and love. Music historians later called it one of the most genuine moments ever recorded in rock. The footage spread across the world, from the UK to Japan, from dusty record stores to early television retrospectives. Fans in Brazil spoke of that night as if it were a sacred event. "Freddie didn't just sing," one fan said. "He became one of us." The Rock in Rio performance went down as one of the most emotional in Queen's history, not because it was perfect, but because it wasn't. For Freddie, that night left a lasting mark. In later interviews, when asked about Rio, he would smile and say, "They saved me that night." It was one of the few times he openly acknowledged how deeply his audience had touched him. Behind the bravado, the stage lights, and the crown, There was a man who had found something real, a reminder that music isn't about control. It's about surrender. As the years passed and his voice grew quieter, the memory of that sea of lights in Rio never faded. It stood as a testament to everything Freddie Mercury represented: passion, imperfection, courage, and connection. And long after the music stopped, that night continued to sing, in every fan who raised their voice when Freddie could not.